Hey guys, tonight we journey back thousands of years to the banks of the Nile, to a civilization known for pyramids, pharaohs and gods that watched your every move. But behind the gold masks and grand temples lies a much harsher reality. Today, we're asking, what would happen if you lived just one day in ancient Egypt? Because let me tell you, the sun isn't the only thing that will roast you alive. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Welcome to ancient Egypt, land of pyramids, gods, and relentless ultraviolet violence. Before you even open your eyes, the sun is already blasting through your reed hut like it's auditioning for the role of unforgiving sky god. There are no curtains, no shades, and certainly no air conditioning. Just the raw, unforgiving heat of the desert, baking everything, including you by breakfast. You're lying on a straw mat with a linen sheet that's more suggestion than protection. The Nile breeze you were promised in all those travel documentaries. Yeah, it's gone. Probably died sometime around 2800 BC. By the time you stumble outside, the temperature is already flirting with 90° F or around 32 C, and it's not even mid-morning. The sun doesn't just shine in ancient Egypt, it attacks your linen tunic. Useless. It's like wearing tissue paper in a sauna. And don't even think about sunscreen. There's no aloe vera, no SPF 50, not even a floppy hat with a logo from a beach resort. Ancient Egyptians did have protective oils, but unless you're wealthy or work in a temple, you're not getting any of it. Your best option, smear yourself with mud or crocodile dung, which apparently might keep you from turning into a human torch, emphasis on might. By midday, the stones under your feet are hot enough to cook lentils. Shade is a luxury. Trees are rare. You might get a little relief hiding behind a mud brick wall, but even that wall is sweating by now. You, on the other hand, look like someone threw you into a clay oven and forgot to set a timer, and you better not complain. Ra, the sun god, is watching. And in ancient Egypt, the sun wasn't just weather. It was divine authority. The hotter the day, the more powerful Ra was feeling. So basically, if you're melting, it's a spiritual compliment. In short, surviving one day in ancient Egypt requires hydration, humility, and an ironclad tolerance for feeling like a roast chicken. And this is just the morning. You're finally out of bed, or rather off your scratchy straw mat. And the good news is the Nile is just a short walk away. The bad news, you can already smell it before you see it. Yes, the mighty Nile, the life-giver of ancient Egypt, revered as sacred, the reason civilization here even exists. But let's be honest, it also smells like a fish market had a bad breakup with a swamp. The banks are buzzing with flies, frogs, and things that probably shouldn't have legs, but do. Still, this is where you bathe. Soap hasn't been invented yet, and even if it had, you couldn't afford it. Instead, you lather yourself in the freshest cleansing technology of the day. Sand, that's right. Exfoliation the Egyptian way. Just rub yourself down with coarse grains and call it skincare. It's like nature's sandpaper, but less effective. Washing clothes also done in the Nile. And by washing, we mean pounding them against rocks while praying that a crocodile doesn't mistake your laundry for a tasty midday snack. Oh, and just to make things more fun, let's not forget the occasional sewage runoff from upstream. Remember, people, livestock, and the occasional funeral boat all share this river. And yet, somehow this is considered clean. You scrub, rinse, and emerge feeling slightly less sticky and only moderately more worried about leeches. If you're a city dweller in Memphis or Thebes, you might be lucky enough to use a public basin or cistern. But for everyone else, it's Nile or nothing. And don't expect privacy. This is a public bathing space shared by families, neighbors, livestock, and the odd ibis pecking around your ankles like it pays rent. Water jars are filled and balanced on heads, carried back to your mud brick house before the midday heat turns the clay into toast. It's a daily ritual, spiritual, necessary, and slightly traumatic. So yes, the Nile is sacred. It feeds you, cleans you, and quenches your thirst. But let's not pretend it's a sparkling oasis. In reality, it's part miracle, part biohazard, and all you've got. By now, you've bathed in the crocodile-infested Nile. You've sandpapered yourself semi-clean, and your body feels like a baked fig. Time for breakfast. The most important and least glamorous meal of your ancient Egyptian day. Let's set expectations. There are no eggs Benedict, no fruit bowls, and absolutely no iced lattes. Breakfast in ancient Egypt is less of a culinary event and more of a tactical refueling operation. You sit on a low stool if you have one, or just squat in the corner like everyone else, the centerpiece of your meal. Bread, lots of it, dense, coarse, and often as chewy as a leather sandal. It's made from emmer wheat or barley and baked in clay ovens that may or may not be shared by the local rats. And don't be surprised if there's sand in your slice. Not as a topping, just an uninvited ingredient from the grinding stones. A daily dose of minerals, you could say. Then comes the beer, but don't get excited. This isn't crisp, bubbly craft ale. This is thick, cloudy, lukewarm, liquid bread. More porridge than pint. It's packed with calories and vaguely fermented. A medieval smoothie with the faint taste of sour cereal and survival. Even children drink it. Not to be edgy, but because it's safer than water. At least the brewing process boils out the parasites, unlike the Nile, which we just discussed is basically a petri dish. If you're lucky, and we mean very lucky, you might get an onion or a few dried dates to go with your carbon foam combo. Protein only if someone caught a fish and didn't immediately eat it raw. And as you chew your rock-like loaf and sip your grain sludge, flies buzz around you like it's a buffet because it is. For them, you swat at them with one hand, hold your cup with the other, and try not to think too hard about the fact that this is likely the best meal you'll have today. Breakfast in ancient Egypt isn't about flavor, it's about function. It fuels your body just enough to survive until the next time someone hands you another sand-infused brick of bread. Bon appetit. You've had your gritty bread, your chunky beer, and just enough rest to call yourself functional. Now it's time to work. And trust me, ancient Egyptian labor makes modern burnout look like a spa day. Unless you're a scribe, priest, or royalty, which, let's be honest, you're not. Your job is pure muscle and dust, no air-conditioned cubicle, no coffee breaks, no ergonomic chairs, just sweat, sand, and a constant risk of collapsing before noon. If you're a farmer, you'll be ankle-deep in Nile mud by sunrise, yanking weeds, or planting barley under the eye of an overseer whose hobby seems to be yelling. You use wooden plows, crude sickles, and your bare hands. If your back hurts, congratulations. That means it's working. If you're a laborer, things get even more biblical. Imagine hauling multi-ton stones for temple construction under a blazing sun while barefoot up-ramps made of gravel and prayer. There's no ocean here. You trip. That's a broken ankle and a shrug from the foreman. Working on tombs. That's another level of grind. You're hammering limestone, chiseling out burial chambers for people who will get to rest longer than you ever will. And if you mess up a pharaoh's tomb, let's just say job security might involve a sealed chamber and a curse. And if you're a woman, you're not off the hook. Domestic work is also physical labor, grinding grain, hauling water, weaving linen, caring for kids, and still helping in the fields. Your break is when the baby naps for 7 minutes. While you prepare dinner, you eat on the go. You wipe sweat with your tunic. You keep moving because slowing down means falling behind. And falling behind means someone else gets your grain quotota and you get the blame. There's no clocking out. The sun is your supervisor. When it finally sinks behind the horizon, you crawl home half alive, dust-caked, and dreaming of softer sandals and a less aggressive sun god. Work in ancient Egypt isn't just hard, it's endless. It's a full-body commitment to survival day after day until your body gives out or your overseer decides you're not worth feeding. And that's not even the worst of it. After sweating your soul out in the fields or quarry, you might be tempted to grumble. Maybe something small, a little this job stinks, or why am I doing this again? Stop right there. Because in ancient Egypt, complaining isn't just frowned upon, it's potentially treason. Why? Because your boss isn't just a ruler, he's a literal god. The pharaoh isn't some guy who got elected or born into a lucky family. He's the human embodiment of Horus, son of Ra, chosen by the heavens to rule over Egypt and keep Mahat, divine cosmic order, intact. In other words, if the river floods well this year, thank the pharaoh. If it doesn't, well, maybe you didn't pray hard enough. Questioning his authority isn't just rude, it's blasphemy. Speaking ill of him could land you a date with a whip, a set of shackles, or an early trip to the underworld with none of your favorite burial goods. You see his face everywhere, on statues, temple walls, coins, even bread molds. His name is chanted in rituals. His image is painted larger than everyone else's in every mural. That's not artistic exaggeration. That's law, and don't expect to ever see him. If you're a commoner, the closest you'll get is watching a golden bark float by during a religious festival. Blink, and he's gone. Back to a palace you'll never enter, surrounded by officials, guards, scribes, and enough gold to finance a small civilization. Which, fun fact, he basically does. If you're lucky enough to work on a royal project, say a tomb, a temple, or a statue the size of a mountain, you serve with divine joy. At least that's what the state says. You say it too, because pretending you're honored to carve stone for 14 hours a day is safer than the alternative. And don't even think about rebellion. Pharaohs crush uprisings faster than you can say dynasty. Just ask the last village that tried to withhold taxes. Oh wait, you can't. It no longer exists. So yes, the pharaoh is divine. And you're just lucky to be allowed to sweat in his name. Now, get back to work. If you thought surviving under the sun was hard, just wait until you realize that in ancient Egypt, sand is your roommate, co-worker, seasoning, and mortal enemy. It's everywhere. In your clothes, in your bed, in your food. There is no escaping it. You could be working, praying, sleeping, or minding your own business in the market. And suddenly, a gust of hot wind sweeps by and turns your face into a grainy exfoliation experiment you didn't ask for. Let's start with the clothes. You wear linen. It's light, breathable, and about as effective at keeping sand out as a screen door is at holding back soup. It slides down your tunic, clings to your skin, and somehow finds its way into places you didn't know had creases. Eating? Good luck. Every loaf of bread is basically a sand trap. Since flour was ground between stone slabs, little bits of grit made their way into the dough. Egyptians didn't just eat their wheat, they ate their millstones too. It's why ancient dental remains are often worn flat like river rocks. Imagine chewing your breakfast while also filing your MERS daily. And if you thought your house was a sand-free zone, think again. Your mud brick home has gaps, crevices, and windows with no glass. Perfect portals for wind-blown sand. Your floors are covered. Your cooking pots are full. Your bed is basically a sandpit disguised as furniture. Shoes optional at best. Most Egyptians walked barefoot, meaning you're always one step away from turning your feet into battered leather sandals. If you do have footwear, it's usually a basic pair of sandals made from reeds. Fashionable perhaps, protective, not remotely. Then there are sandstorms, Egypt's version of a slap from the gods. Sudden, swirling, blinding. One moment you're talking to a friend, the next you're spitting dust and feeling like someone dumped an entire beach into your eye sockets. Visibility drops to zero, and everyone around you turns into vaguely coughing silhouettes. In short, sand is the roommate who never leaves, the spice in every meal, and the silent enemy of your eyes, lungs, and dignity. It's not just the backdrop of your life. It's part of your body now. And no, you can't wash it off. You already tried in the Nile, which is probably full of more sand. In ancient Egypt, religion isn't just a weekend activity. It's the operating system for everything. Your job, your diet, your hygiene routine, your bedtime rituals, all dictated by gods who seem to have very specific opinions. First, understand this. The gods are everywhere. Your town has temples to a dozen different deities, each responsible for some vital function. There's Ra, who pilots the sun across the sky like it's a divine Uber. These headed god of wisdom is in charge of scribes and moon calendars. Sobek, part crocodile, part nightmare fuel, guards the Nile. And Bastet, the cat goddess, basically runs public relations. Forget personal freedom. Your daily routine revolves around pleasing them. Wake up, thank Hara, spill some beer, apologize to Hathor, stub your toe, curse quietly, or risk attracting a spirit with a grudge. Before meals, you offer a bit of food to the gods. Before bed, you pray that Set, god of chaos, doesn't toss your house into existential disarray overnight. Even funerals are multi-day affairs where the deceased must pass tests, avoid demons, and prove they were morally decent or risk eternal erasure. Speaking of the afterlife, ancient Egyptians took it very seriously. You don't just die and move on. You must pass a judgment process involving your heart being weighed against a feather of truth. If your heart's heavier because of lies, cruelty, or maybe stealing someone's goat, you're eaten by Amit, a creature with the head of a crocodile, the body of a lion, and the legs of your worst nightmare. So yes, even in death, you're still on probation. But here's the twist. This complex belief system isn't depressing, it's comforting. Egyptians believed life was part of a cosmic balance, and if you followed the rituals and upheld Mahat, the principle of truth and order, you had a chance at a peaceful eternity, complete with food, family, and maybe a boat. Of course, the richer you were, the more gods seemed to notice you. Temples were massive, priests were powerful, and peasants, well, they just hoped the gods were feeling generous that day. Because in ancient Egypt, faith isn't optional. It's your job description, your insurance plan, and your travel itinerary for the next life. So you've stepped on something sharp, got bit by something weird, or caught something contagious, which in ancient Egypt is basically Tuesday. Time to seek medical care. Just don't expect a waiting room or a sterile environment. You're about to be healed with a combination of spells, herbs, and sheer optimism. First, you'll be taken to a doctor. And to be fair, they were some of the most advanced in the ancient world. They had surgical tools, medical texts, and a decent understanding of anatomy. But here's the catch. Science in ancient Egypt always came with a heavy dose of magic. You're given a pus made of honey, moldy, bread, and crushed herbs. Honey actually is antibacterial, and mold has early penicillin properties, so it works sort of. But before applying it, the healer will chant a protective spell just to be safe, because you never know when your stomach cramps are actually the result of a spiteful ghost or an angry god. Have a headache? You might get a dose of crushed onions rubbed into your scalp while someone recites a hymn to Tho. Let's smear cow dung mixed with dates on your chest and see what happens. Eye infection. Time for a paste of lizard blood, ochre, and beer. Plus, a prayer to Horus. Surgery. It did happen sometimes. Abscesses were drained, bones were set, and wounds were stitched with linen thread. But there's no anesthesia. Just a sharp knife and a friend to hold your shoulders down while you scream into a mud brick pillow. Dentistry, not great. Remember all that sand in the bread. Your teeth are worn down by your 20s. If one gets infected, your options are 1, live with it, 2, die from it, or 3, have it pulled with something resembling pliers made by a blacksmith with low standards. And let's not forget the amulets. Whether you're giving birth, getting stitched up, or just sneezing too loud, a good doctor-priest will probably hang a charm around your neck, just in case the real issue is an invisible serpent spirit curled around your spleen. So, yes, Egyptian. Medicine had its moments, but mostly you'd better believe in the gods because your band-aid is literally a prayer. Here's a plot twist most people don't expect. Ancient Egyptian women had more rights than many women in later civilizations. They could own property, run businesses, file for divorce, and even take a man to court. Sounds progressive, right? But before you pack your bags for a time-trained girl boss vacation, hold up. Because while the legal status might impress you, the day-to-day reality not so glamorous. If you're a woman in ancient Egypt, you probably wake up before sunrise. You're grinding grain by hand using a giant flat stone that chews through both wheat and your spine. Then it's off to haul water from the Nile, cook breakfast, care for children, manage the household, feed animals, and if needed, help in the fields. You're a one-woman workforce in linen. There's no me time, no spa days, and definitely no maternity leave. Childbirth is risky and painful. Midwives are helpful, sure, but there are no epidurals, no disinfectant, and no push playlists featuring relaxing harps. You give birth in a hot room with incense, prayers, and hopefully not too much bleeding. Let's talk fashion. Let's talk fashion. Linen dresses are light and breathable, but there's no underwear and no shoes. The sun scorches your skin, the sand grinds into everything, and the bugs think you're an all-you-can-eat buffet. Want makeup? Great. Egyptian women did wear cosmetics, but it's lead-based and applied with sticks that look suspiciously like toothpicks. Now, if you're lucky enough to be born into a wealthy family, things are better. You might read, write, manage estate accounts, or become a priestess. If you're born royal, you could even become pharaoh like Hatshepsut or Cleopatra, who ruled with brilliance and terrifying eyeliner. But if you're poor, your status may be legal, but your reality is physical. You work, sweat, bend, carry, birth, bury, and pray. You're not chained by law, but by survival. Still, Egyptian women had agency, and that mattered. They could speak in court, keep their inheritance, and didn't become property when they married. Compared to many ancient societies, that's huge. So, yes, Egyptian women had rights, but comfort, that's reserved for statues and goddesses. Not the woman elbow-deep in dough while swatting flies off a toddler. You made it through another grueling day in ancient Egypt. You ate your gritty bread, hauled your buckets, avoided divine wrath, and maybe even dodged a sandstorm. Time to relax, right? Wrong. Because in ancient Egypt, your real test begins after you die. Death isn't the end. It's just the beginning of an incredibly bureaucratic, multi-phased journey through the underworld. And if you thought the labor overseer was strict, wait until you meet the gods of judgment. First, your soul takes a trip to the Hall of Mahat. Here, before a tribunal of 42 deities, you must proclaim your innocence in what's basically the oldest legal deposition in history. You say things like, I did not steal, I did not lie, I did not covet my neighbor's donkey, all while hoping the gods buy it. Then comes the heart test. Literally, your heart, believed to be the seat of the soul, is placed on a scale opposite the feather of Mahat, the symbol of truth, justice, and balance. If your heart is heavier than the feather, well, that means you've lived a wicked life. Enter Amit, part lion, part crocodile, part hippo, all terrifying. She doesn't arrest you, she doesn't find you, she eats your soul, destroying it forever. No afterlife, no second chances, just eternal non-existence, which in a culture obsessed with eternity is the ultimate punishment, and it gets better. You can doom yourself not just by actions, but by words. One wrong confession, one forgotten line during your judgment, and boom, spiritual obliteration. It's like an open book test where failure means getting devoured by a mythological death hybrid. If you do pass, congratulations. You get to enter the field of reeds, a peaceful, idealized version of Egypt, where your soul lives forever with boats, with crops, with family, and presumably with fewer sand fleas. But the stakes, enormous. That's why Egyptians obsessed over tomb, preparation, funeral rites, and magical texts like the Book of the Dead. A spiritual cheat sheet full of prayers, spells, and helpful tips like don't insult the crocodile god. So yes, the afterlife might be beautiful, but only if you live your life very carefully. One curse word, one unpaid temple tax, and your next stop is lunch for Amit. Sleep tight. If there's one small mercy in ancient Egypt, it's this linen. Blessed, breathable linen. Your entire wardrobe and everyone else's is made from this plant-based fabric. It's light, cool, and lets your skin breathe in the scorching heat. That's the good news. The bad news, that's pretty much where the comfort ends. Whether you're a farmer, builder, priest, or vendor, you're wearing the same outfit every day. For men, a short white kilt or loincloth. For women, a straight sleeveless, linen dress, sometimes held up by straps, sometimes not. If you're upper class, you might have pleat or beads or fancy patterns. If you're not, it's plain white or slightly greyish, depending on how long it's been since laundry day. Oh, and laundry day. You're hand scrubbing your clothes in the Nile, while hoping a hippo doesn't emerge mid-ar. Most people go barefoot. Sandals made from woven reeds or leather are reserved for special occasions or temple priests. So, unless you're royalty, expect to spend your days with hot sand between your toes and possibly a sharp rock in your heel. Accessories, absolutely, but mostly functional. Amulets for protection, necklaces to show status, and eye makeup made from powdered coal, which wasn't just for fashion. It helped reduce glare from the sun and supposedly warded off infections. Yes, even eyeliner had a job in ancient Egypt. But no matter how well you dress, the bugs don't care. Flies, gnats, mosquitoes. They treat your airy outfit as an invitation. You're walking through the day swatting constantly, rubbing on perfumed oils, and praying that your linen doesn't stick to you like a wet curtain the moment the sun reaches full strength. And of course, your outfit doesn't change with the seasons because Egypt doesn't really have seasons, just hot and slightly less hot. So your linen ensemble is basically your year-round uniform, whether it's 110 degrees or a chilly 70 degrees evening. So, yes, Egyptian clothing was light, elegant, and far more comfortable than what Romans would wear later. But don't let the breezy outfits fool you, because no matter how floaty your tunic feels, your life is still heavy with labor, heat, sand, and bugs that refuse to respect your personal space. You've survived another blistering Egyptian day, hauling bricks, dodging sandstorms, and praying your linen doesn't disintegrate mid-task. But in ancient Egypt, survival is always temporary. Because no matter how tough you are, you probably won't live past 35. Let's break it down. If you make it past childhood, which is already an achievement considering infant mortality rates were sky high, you're thrust straight into adulthood by age 13. Marriage, work, and child rearing all start early because honestly, you're running out of time. You might die from heat stroke, or an infected cut, or childbirth, or crocodiles, or scorpion stings, or bad bread. And forget antibiotics. If you get a fever, the best treatment is honey, herbs, and hoping the gods don't have other plans for your soul. But here's the twist. Egyptians weren't scared of death, they planned for it. In fact, they planned for it better than most people plan for retirement today. If you're rich, you commission a tomb, the ancient version of a 5-star eternity suite. You start saving up grave goods, jewelry, food offerings, perfumes, statues, even tiny servant dolls called shabaptis to do your chores in the afterlife. Think of them as spiritual interns who work while you nap forever. Your body is embalmed, wrapped in linen, stuffed with matron, natural salt, and tucked neatly into a painted sarcophagus. You're buried with a copy of the Book of the Dead, which is less about doom and more like a mystical travel guide, complete with passwords for the afterlife, spells to confuse demons, and instructions for not getting eaten by soul-devouring monsters. If you're poor, well, your tomb is likely a shallow pit in the sand. Your body is wrapped in whatever fabric your family can spare. Maybe a pot or two placed nearby, and then covered with earth. No murals, no golden mask, just you and the wind. But even the poorest Egyptians held onto the dream of the afterlife, a peaceful, fertile paradise called the Field of Reeds, where you farm without sweat, eat without hunger, and sail the Nile forever under gentle sunlight. So yes, you'll probably die young in ancient Egypt. But if you lived well, prayed right, and didn't insult too many jackal-headed gods, you just might spend eternity in style. You finally made it to the afterlife, or at least into the tomb. You've been embalmed, wrapped, blessed, and buried. Time to rest in peace, right? Well, not exactly. Because in ancient Egypt, even the dead get robbed. Let's start with a simple truth. Tombs are full of expensive stuff. Gold amulets, jewelry, perfumed oils, carved statues, chests full of linens, and for pharaohs, literal boatloads of treasure, all intended to be taken into the afterlife. But treasure in a tomb is basically an open invitation for someone with a chisel and bad intentions. Tomb robbery was so common that it became a full-time problem. Pharaohs tried to fight it by hiding their tombs deep in cliffs, locking them behind trapdoors and scrawling terrifying curses on the walls. Things like, "May a crocodile devour your soul," or "May your limbs be twisted forever by a serpent made of fire." Spoiler, the curses didn't work. Grave robbers came anyway at night in secret with inside knowledge. Sometimes they were locals, sometimes they were corrupt workers who helped build the tombs. In some cases, even priests and guards were in on it, and the punishment for getting caught severe. Think public beatings, mutilation, exile, or death. But considering how valuable tomb goods were, especially gold and rare incense, the risk often seemed worth it. After all, the dead don't fight back. But it's not just the wealthy who got robbed. Even commoners' graves were disturbed. Poorer Egyptians might have been buried with a small pot of beer or a loaf of bread for the afterlife. That was still worth stealing. Food was scarce, tools were valuable, and linen was currency. The irony, tomb robbing wasn't just about greed. Sometimes it was about survival. Egypt went through famines, political collapse, and invasions. A hungry worker might break into a tomb not for treasure, but for food. And when your children are starving, a few funeral offerings look less like sacred objects and more like dinner. So in ancient Egypt, you're not safe just because you're dead. Your tomb can be looted, your name erased, and your mummy unwrapped by some desperate soul with a pickaxe and poor moral judgment. Rest in peace. Only if no one knows where you're buried. We've all seen them. Those majestic, mysterious carvings on the walls of temples and tombs. Birds, eyes, snakes, lotus flowers. Men walking sideways like they're on a fashion runway. Ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs. Visually stunning and insanely difficult to learn. Sure, they look cool, but try reading them. Hieroglyphs weren't just decorative art. They were a full-blown writing system with over 700 characters and growing. Some symbols represent entire words. Others are sounds and many are determinatives, which clarify meaning because you know writing. The word star with an actual star symbol might be too straightforward, and don't expect spaces or punctuation. Ancient Egyptian writing was basically one long, beautiful riddle with artistic flair, zero vowels, and a deep need for context. Oh, and it can be written left to right left, or top to bottom, depending on what the scribe felt like that day. The trick: look at which way the birds or people are facing. That's your reading direction. If they're facing right, read right. Facing left, read left. And if they're upside down, good luck. Learning to write hieroglyphs wasn't for commoners. Literacy was rare. Maybe 1% of the population could actually read and write. If you wanted in, you had to become a scribe, which meant years of intense education, starting as a child. You'd memorize hundreds of symbols, copy endless scrolls, and practice so much that your hand probably curled into a claw by age 15. But the payoff, huge. Scribes were respected, well-fed, and never made to haul bricks under the sun. Instead, they wrote tax records, court documents, letters, and religious texts. They were essential to society and protected from most manual labor. In a world where writing was power, scribes ruled quietly from the shadows. For the rest of the population, though, writing was something magical. Literally, hieroglyphs were believed to have sacred power. Writing someone's name preserved their soul. Erasing it, total spiritual annihilation. So, yeah, spelling really mattered. So while hieroglyphs may look like ancient emoji, they're more like a linguistic Rubik's Cube wrapped in myth, math, and mystery. Beautiful? Yes. Easy to learn? Absolutely not. After 14 chapters of heat, hunger, sand, superstition, and back-breaking labor, it's time to ask the big question. Would you survive a single day in ancient Egypt? Let's be honest, probably not. Sure, it's easy to romanticize the ancient world. Golden tombs, lotus-scented air, graceful hieroglyphs, gods with animal heads, and a thing for order and beauty. But behind the iconic monuments and stunning art was a world of brutal realities that spared no one but the elite, your average Egyptian. Day started with a dirt floor, a cloud of flies, and the knowledge that if you didn't work, you didn't eat. You walked barefoot on blazing sand, hauled water, cooked over open fires, lived shoulder to shoulder with bugs, smoke, and livestock. You worried about disease, divine punishment, and whether a snake might slither into your sleeping mat. You had no toothpaste, no medicine, no retirement plan. And if you were lucky, maybe 2 changes of linen. You served a god king who could take your land with a decree, a climate that cooked your skin by noon, and a religion that required you to pass a literal divine test after death, just to get into the good version of the afterlife. Let's also not forget the things you didn't have. No antibiotics, no sunscreen, no privacy, no plumbing, no painkillers, and no easy escape. Once you were born into your class, that was it. No promotions, no career changes, no finding yourself. You were either a scribe, a farmer, a laborer, a mother, a servant, or dead. And yet for all this, the ancient Egyptians weren't miserable. They believed deeply in their gods, their purpose, and the beauty of life. They loved music, dance, food, family, and festivals. They joked, they painted, they imagined eternity, with enough clarity to build stone monuments that still stand today. But for a modern person, without your air conditioning, your filtered water, your Advil, your sneakers, and your smartphone, you'd fold before the second sandstorm hit. So, no, you wouldn't last a day in ancient Egypt. But that's okay, because they lasted thousands of years. And maybe, just maybe, that's why we still talk about them. In the heart of ancient Teotihuacan, one pyramid refuses to be forgotten. Its surface is adorned not with peaceful symbols of faith or gentle gods, but with snarling, open-mouthed stone serpents. Dozens of them. They jut out from the temple's facade as if frozen in mid-strike, fangs bared, eyes wide. This is the temple of the feathered serpent, known to many as the Temple of Quetzalcoatl. But unlike most temples that reach for the sky with reverence, this one feels different. It feels predatory. From the moment you approach it, there's an eerie sense that you're being watched. The stone serpent heads aren't mere decoration. They were warnings, symbols of divine wrath, and beneath their gaze, something horrific once unfolded. Excavations over the past few decades have revealed something that archaeologists didn't expect. Hidden beneath the temple's base were not just ceremonial offerings, but something far more disturbing. Human remains, and not a handful. Over 200 bodies, many of them decapitated, hands bound behind their backs. Young men, warriors perhaps, buried in groups, ritual sacrifices arranged with mathematical precision. Some were buried with obsidian knives at their sides, others with necklaces made of human teeth or jewelry crafted from jawbones. They weren't simply thrown into the ground. They were deliberately placed in positions of symbolic significance. It's clear this was no mass grave. It was a message, a divine transaction, carved into stone and sealed with blood. But what kind of belief system justifies such horror? Who demanded so many lives be taken at once? The Temple of the Fathered Serpent wasn't just a religious building. It was a theatre of power, a place where rulers fused cosmology, warfare, and fear to maintain control over a city of more than 100,000 souls. And this ritual bloodletting may have been the cost of keeping the cosmos in balance. As you stand before this temple today, gazing at those stone serpents, you're not just looking at art or architecture. You're looking into the eyes of a civilization that believed the gods needed blood and that they had every right to deliver it. But who were these people? Who commanded such violence and vanished without a trace? The answer lies in the shadows of Teotihuacan. Before the mighty Aztec Empire, before the Maya carved their cosmic calendar into stone, there stood a city unlike any other in the ancient Americas, Teotihuacan. Its name, given by the later Aztecs, means the place where gods were born. And When you walk its immense avenue of the dead, flanked by pyramids that scrape the heavens, you start to understand why. At its height, around 100 to 250 CE, Teotihuacan was a sprawling metropolis of over 100,000 people, making it one of the largest cities in the world at the time, rivaling ancient Rome, Alexandria, and Chang'an in size and influence. It was a city meticulously planned: wide boulevards, gritted streets, apartment compounds housing extended families, multi-story structures made from volcanic stone. And at the center of it all, three massive pyramids: the Pyramid of the Moon, the Pyramid of the Sun, and the Temple of the Feathered Serpent. But here's what makes Teotihuacan different. No one knows who built it. Seriously, to this day, we don't know the name of the people who constructed this place. We don't even know what they called themselves. There are no written records, no kings' names carved into stone. Teotihuacan seems to have been a society ruled not by a single monarch, but perhaps by a council, a theocracy, or something altogether foreign to our understanding of ancient power. And despite this anonymity, their influence was colossal. Evidence of Teotihuacan's power has been found hundreds of miles away, from the Maya cities of Tikal and Copan to the distant Zapoch capital of Monte Alban. Obsidian blades, ceramic styles, murals, and even political meddling. In one case, Teotihuacan emissaries may have helped overthrow a local Maya king to install a ruler more favorable to their interests. But how did they maintain such a vast network? How did a city with no known writing system command such authority across Mesoamerica? The answer may lie in how they combined cosmic ideology with statecraft. Their temples were more than places of worship. They were tools of control, aligning perfectly with astronomical events, serving as theaters of ritual sacrifice, and reminding every citizen and every visitor that Teotihuacan was no ordinary city. It was the axis of the world, a sacred engine that kept time, fate, and blood flowing in sync. And at the heart of it all stood the Temple of the Feathered Serpent. To understand the temple, you must first understand the deity it was dedicated to, the Feathered Serpent. Known later by the Aztecs as Quetzalcoatl and to the Maya as Kulkin, this figure is one of the most enigmatic gods in all of Mesoamerican mythology. But in Teotihuacan, centuries before the Aztecs rose to power, the Feathered Serpent was already a central, possibly supreme divine force. But here's the paradox. What kind of god is both a serpent and a bird? Think about that. Serpents slither through the underworld. They shed their skin, symbolizing rebirth, duality, and death. Birds soar high in the sky, closer to the sun, representing freedom, divinity, and life-giving wind. To combine these two, earthbound and sky-dwelling, death and life, chaos and order, was to create something entirely cosmic, something terrifyingly powerful. The Feathered Serpent wasn't just a god, he was a bridge between worlds. On the facade of the temple, carved in deep relief, we see dozens of his images. Goggle eyes, bared teeth, plumed headdresses. Some historians believe these represent the god himself. Others suggest they're warriors or priestly figures adorned in divine regalia to signal their authority. Either way, they are everywhere. The temple is covered in these snake-bird hybrids, as if the structure itself breathes with divine presence. But the Feathered Serpent wasn't just a god of the heavens. He was intimately tied to sacrifice. Blood was the fuel that kept the cosmos in motion. And Quetzalcoatl, though later remembered as a gentle, civilizing deity, had a much darker role. In Teotihuacan, he demanded offerings and not just of maize or incense, but of life itself. In some myths, he descended into the underworld to retrieve the bones of the dead and create humankind. But to bring life from death, there had to be a trade. The gods sacrificed themselves for humanity, and humans in return were expected to do the same. The Temple of the Feathered Serpent wasn't just a monument to faith. It was a cosmic engine designed to link the sky, the earth, and the underworld through ritual. Every stone, every serpent head, every buried victim fed into that system. Teotihuacan didn't just worship the feathered serpent. They embodied his logic, paradox, power, and blood. And the most disturbing truths were hidden beneath the surface. For centuries, the temple of the feathered serpent stood silently, a weathered, imposing structure half swallowed by time. Locals whispered legends, scholars made guesses. But no one could have imagined what was buried beneath its layered stones until archaeologists broke through in the late 1980s and early 2000s. What they found wasn't just unexpected, it was unsettling. Hidden beneath the temple's foundations were a series of long sealed chambers and pits, each filled with carefully arranged human remains. These weren't the messy results of war or disease. These were deliberate sacrifices, systematic, ritualistic, cold. The victims, numbering over 200, were young men, many between 15 and 25. Some wore necklaces made of human jawbones. Others had their hands tied behind their backs. A few were decapitated. Obsidian knives, sharp and black as night, were scattered nearby, the unmistakable tools of ritual slaughter. And this is where it gets darker. The arrangement of the bodies followed geometric and symbolic patterns. They weren't buried randomly. They were placed in quadrants, cardinal directions, possibly to mirror the cosmos. Even the number of bodies mattered. It wasn't just about death. It was about meaningful death. Offerings surrounded the victims: jaguar bones, serpents, exotic shells from the distant Gulf Coast, figurines, and obsidian blades that had never been used in battle. This wasn't punishment. It was a gift. These young men, most likely warriors, had been selected not to die in disgrace, but to die as part of something transcendent. To the Teotihuacanos, the very act of building a temple may have required human sacrifice. It was as if every stone had to be consecrated with blood, every layer raised only after an offering had been made. The deeper you dig, the more sacrifice you find. In one chamber, archaeologists discovered elaborate tunnels filled with mercury and mica materials associated with the underworld. The floor glimmered like water. Was this a symbolic passage to the land of the dead? A mirror of the night sky? The more they excavated, the more it felt like the temple was not built on top of death, but constructed to encase it. The blood didn't stain the stone by accident. The stone was meant to hold the blood, and all of it was for the gods. Look closer at the temple of the feathered serpent, and you'll notice something strange, something unnerving. It doesn't just sit on the landscape. It aligns with the universe. Teotihuacan wasn't built randomly. The entire city was laid out along precise cosmic axes. Its central avenue of the dead runs at a 15-degree angle off true north. Not a mistake, but a deliberate shift, possibly to align with the setting of the Pleiades star cluster or the sun on specific ritual dates. The temple of the feathered serpent sits directly along this avenue, locking it into a grand celestial blueprint. But why? What were they trying to align with? Archaeologists and archaeoasters have debated this for decades. Some suggest the temple lines up with the equinox sunrise. Others argue it connects to Venus, the planet most sacred to Mesoamerican civilizations, often associated with war, sacrifice, and rebirth. When Venus rose or set, wars were declared, offerings made, and temples activated with ritual fire. Even the temple's dimensions seem intentional. The repetition of the number 7, the number of visible planetary bodies, appears in its step platforms. There's symmetry, rhythm, and a stunning understanding of both earthly math and cosmic cycles. And beneath the surface, more clues. In 2003, archaeologists uncovered a tunnel beneath the temple. Not a crude passage, but a deliberately constructed subterranean world. The walls were once covered in powdered pyite, a shimmering mineral that would have reflected light like starlight. Combined with mercury pools and micro-lined walls, the tunnel seemed designed to replicate the cosmos itself. To walk through it would be like traveling through the Milky Way, a symbolic journey to the underworld, or perhaps to rebirth. Was this temple not just a place of sacrifice, but a cosmic machine? A portal that aligned earth, sky, and the spirit realm. Some scholars believe Teayoti saw time as circular, not linear. Every ritual, every building, every sacrifice wasn't a one-time event. It was part of an eternal cycle. Death leading to renewal, sacrifice fueling rebirth. The temple's alignments may have helped predict celestial movements, coordinate harvests, and more importantly, time when to offer blood. The Temple of the Feathered Serpent wasn't just looking at the stars. It was trying to speak to them. The Temple of the Feathered Serpent wasn't just a spiritual beacon. It was a political weapon. Its very design was meant to overwhelm, to intimidate, to remind every viewer, local or foreign, who held the reins of power in Teotihuacan. Imagine standing in its shadow 1,800 years ago. You, a visitor from a smaller city-state, would arrive at the Avenue of the Dead, already aruck by the sheer scale of Teayotiwa. But when you reached the Temple of the Feathered Serpent, you'd freeze. The serpent heads stare at you, their fangs bared. Jaguar symbols growl from the stone. The plaza ahead once held massive gatherings, not just for celebration, but for public ritual. You might even witness a sacrifice. The ruling elite of Teotihuacan understood something crucial. Fear is power, and nothing stirs fear like divine wrath. By orchestrating ritual executions in broad daylight, surrounded by cosmic symbols and death imagery, they sent a clear message. The gods are with us, and we are not afraid to feed them. But this wasn't chaos. This was theater. Priests in feathered headdresses and obsidian masks would chant, dance, and spill blood, turning cosmic myth into political performance. It wasn't just about pleasing the gods. It was about reminding everyone watching that the city's rulers had direct access to the divine. They alone could open the heavens or summon rain, protect the people, or destroy their enemies. Even the architecture helped reinforce this propaganda. From the temple's upper tiers, leaders could look down upon the plaza. They controlled not just the narrative, but the very physical space in which it unfolded. The people looked up at the gods, at the rulers, at the sacrifices, and knew their place. And for outsiders, Teotihuacan didn't need to conquer with swords. It conquered with symbols. Visiting dignitaries would carry home tales of awe and terror. They would speak of the feathered serpents, the endless avenues, the blood rituals that lit the sky red. In a world where gods ruled through fear, Teotihuacan positioned itself as their chosen mouthpiece, and the Temple of the Feathered Serpent was the loudest voice of all. At its peak, Teotihuacan was the heartbeat of Mesoamerica, a city of fire and stone, of gods and blood, a city that seemed destined to last forever. But around the year 550 CE, something changed, something broke, and the silence that followed was as chilling as the temple's stone serpent heads. The fall of Teotihuacan was not loud and glorious. It was gradual, then sudden. Signs of strain began appearing decades earlier, signs that the cosmic engine was faltering. Evidence points to a long period of drought, crop failure, and social unrest. The very systems that had sustained this grand city, centralized, power, religious dominance, cosmic order, began to crack under pressure. And then came the fire. Archaeologists have uncovered widespread burn layers across elite compounds, temples, and administrative buildings, including signs of violent destruction at the Temple of the Feathered Serpent. What's strange is that the lower-arse residential areas were mostly untouched. This wasn't an external invasion. This was an uprising, a rebellion, possibly from within. The very people who once watched sacrifices in awe may have risen against their priest-kings. The Temple of the Feathered Serpent, once a symbol of divine authority, was ransacked. Sculptures were defaced, fires were set, ritual spaces were desecrated, and then silence. Teotihuacan wasn't completely abandoned overnight, but it lost its soul. Trade networks collapsed. Artistic production ceased. The great rituals stopped. The ruling elite disappeared. The temple no longer spoke. And yet, the mystery only deepened, because while the city faded, its memory endured. Centuries later, the Aztecs arrived in the Valley of Mexico and stumbled upon its ruins. They were Arak. They believed gods had built this place. They named it Teotihuacan, the place where gods were born. They built their own myths around its pyramids, revering it as sacred ground, even as they had no idea who its original builders were. To them, the Temple of the Feathered Serpent was not a ruin. It was a relic of divine truth. But the irony remains. The most powerful city of its time, built on cosmic order and blood, vanished without a written word, without a final record, leaving behind only stone and questions. The gods, it seemed, had gone quiet. For over 1,000 years, the Temple of the Feathered Serpent lay buried beneath layers of dust, volcanic ash, and silence. Locals avoided it. Farmers tilled around. It and the world forgot it until the modern age of archaeology arrived and cracked open the secrets buried within its heart. In the early 20th century, Mexican archaeologists began excavating Teotihuacan. What they found was astonishing: a perfectly engineered city, far older than the Aztecs. But it wasn't until the 1980s and 2000s that the temple itself began to yield its most intimate and most chilling revelations. One of the most dramatic discoveries came in 2011, when researchers uncovered a sealed tunnel beneath the Temple of the Feathered Serpent. It had been deliberately closed off nearly 1,800 years earlier, as if to prevent anyone from entering ever again. After years of excavation, scientists unearthed a cosmic corridor, a symbolic underworld lined with pyite to mimic a starlit sky, pools of liquid mercury, and thousands of ritual objects: jade statues, rubber balls, obsidian blades, and even carved wooden masks. It felt less like a tomb and more like a message. Why would the ancient builders go to such lengths? What were they trying to preserve or hide? Some experts believe the tunnel was used in initiation rituals. Others suggest it symbolized the creation of the world, a mythological womb where gods were born, where kings were made, where divine order was negotiated between humans and the cosmos. The mercury, once thought to be only toxic, may have represented water, or the fluid veil between worlds. And among all these glittering fragments was one persistent whisper. The feathered serpent still lingered not just as a myth, but as a presence, in murals, in carvings, in the geometry of the temple itself. The serpent hadn't disappeared. It had coiled inward, deep into the bones of the city, waiting to be rediscovered. And with each excavation, each uncovered jawbone or golden ornament, we draw a little closer to its message, one carved not in language but in stone, sacrifice and shadow. Modern science has given us X-rays, drones, and ground-penetrating radar. But even with all our tools, one truth remains. The temple still keeps secrets. Today, the Temple of the Feathered Serpent stands as a haunting monument, not just to a civilization long gone, but to a way of thinking that merged power, cosmos, and death into one unbreakable system. Tourists snap photos. Children run past the stone serpent heads, but the ground beneath their feet is soaked in 1,000 untold stories and over 200 known human sacrifices. And still, the temple endures. Its legacy is not just architectural, it's psychological, spiritual, cultural. The feathered serpent, this paradoxical god of sky and earth, continued to evolve. He would be adopted by the Toltecs, then reborn by the Aztecs as Quetzalcoatl, where his myth took on a gentler tone. The bringer of knowledge, the god who wept. For humanity, the one who vowed to return. This reimagining of the serpent god shows how myths don't die, they transform. Even in modern Mexico, echoes of the feathered serpent persist in art, in murals, in literature, and in national identity. The temple's image has appeared on coins, stamps, and even government buildings. It has become a symbol of mystery, of pre-Columbian brilliance, and of the untamed spiritual world that once pulsed through Mesoamerica. But there's another legacy, one less visible, more uncomfortable. The Temple of the Fathered Serpent forces us to confront the price of belief. It asks hard questions. How far will humans go to feel connected to the divine? What happens when power and religion become indistinguishable? Can beauty coexist with terror? In many ways, the temple isn't just a historical site. It's a mirror, a reflection of us. Our fascination with life after death, our hunger for meaning, our capacity to build monuments of staggering beauty and to stain them with blood. The temple teaches us that greatness comes with shadows, that civilizations can soar to impossible heights while burying their secrets beneath the stones. And maybe that's why we keep returning, not just to visit, but to understand. Because deep down we know the serpent is still watching, not to strike, but to remind. Remind us of what we once were and what we still might be. Before we spoke in words, we spoke in rhythm. Tens of thousands of years ago, long before the invention of writing, even before the birth of language itself, early humans began to create something that could only be described as sound with intention. Not speech, not melody, but rhythm. A hand slapping hollow bark, a stick tapping a stone, a foot stomping earth in time. Somewhere in that ancient repetition, something magical emerged. The first drum beat. It wasn't called music. It wasn't called anything, but it felt like something. Like communication, like movement, like emotion taking form. Anthropologists have uncovered evidence of primitive percussion instruments dating back over 30,000 years. These were likely made from natural materials, tree trunks, hollowed out gourds, stretched animal hides. Nothing fancy, nothing preserved. But these rudimentary drums were not toys or idle distractions. They served real purposes. To warn, to summon, to connect. Imagine a tribe scattered across a dense forest. One beat from a distant drum and others knew danger is coming. Or a celebration has begun. Or the gods are listening. The earliest drums weren't just tools. They were extensions of the human body. A heartbeat externalized. A pulse that could be felt across a valley. Drumming wasn't something you watched or listened to. It was something you participated in together, around fires, under stars, in caves where echoes made the air itself vibrate. These ancient rhythms became a language of emotion, joy, grief, warning, hope, all expressed not in syllables or symbols, but in patterned sound. Before the first flutes were carved, before string instruments were dreamed of, the drum was already alive, anchoring us in time, giving shape to ritual, and uniting individuals into tribes. In that way, the drum became humanity's first instrument and perhaps its first form of collective identity. No matter where on earth people lived, they created something to strike, something to beat, something to mark the moment. Because even when we had no words, we had rhythm. And that rhythm was everything. In the cradle of early human civilization, drums were not just instruments. They were sacred voices. Every tribe, every culture, every corner of the earth developed its own rhythm. But the purpose was nearly universal, to commune with the unseen. In Africa, where some of the world's earliest drums emerged, rhythm was deeply intertwined with life, death, and ancestry. The gambe carved from a single tree and wrapped in goatskin was believed to contain three spirits. That of the tree, it was carved from the animal whose skin gave it voice, and the craftsman who brought it to life. Played in circles, the gem didn't just accompany rituals. It was the ritual. Then there were the talking drums capable of mimicking human speech through pitch and tone. In West Africa, these drums carried messages across miles, relaying news, warnings, births, and deaths from one village to the next. Long before the telephone, humans were already drumming their messages through the landscape. Across the oceans, Native American tribes treated the drum as a living entity. It was the heartbeat of Mother Earth, played in ceremonies to honor ancestors, summon healing, or guide the souls of the dead. The large powwow drum, played by a circle of drummers, was both a musical and spiritual engine, a communal pulse that aligned humans with nature and spirit. In Australia, The Aboriginal people used clapsticks and percussive stomps in the sacred Dreamtime, a mythic era of creation. In the Arctic, Inuit shamans struck frame drums to enter trance states, seeking visions or communicating with spirits during long, dark winters. These weren't performances. These were acts of survival, healing, storytelling, and connection. To drum was to remember. To drum was to belong. And always, it was communal. Drums brought people together into sacred circles, synchronizing hearts and intentions. No sheet music, no stage, just bodies moving, hands striking, souls stirring, all unified by rhythm. It didn't matter where on earth you stood. If you heard a drum in the distance, you knew something sacred was happening, something that words alone could never express. From sacred circles to bloody battlefields, the drum has always spoken, sometimes with comfort and sometimes with command. As human societies evolved into kingdoms and empires, drums transformed into tools of domination, instruments of order, and weapons of fear. The earliest armies didn't have radios or megaphones. They had drums. In ancient China, massive drums called bo were struck to coordinate troops across vast terrains. With a single resonant boom, commanders could signal a charge, retreat, or flanking maneuver. These drums weren't just loud, they were strategic. Each rhythm meant something specific, and trained soldiers knew how to listen, even through the chaos of battle. In Mesopotamia, temple drums were used to announce rulers and summon the public. But in times of conflict, they echoed through city walls, terrifying enemies with a deep, relentless thunder. It wasn't just percussion, it was psychological warfare. When the Romans marched, they brought with them the tympanum, a frame drum used in processions and by cults like that of Cybele. Though not a battlefield instrument in the way horns and standards were, it carried symbolic power, a sound of empire, discipline, and order. But no army wielded drums quite like the Ottomans. Their metab bands, the world's first known military orchestras, unleashed an overwhelming storm of drums, cymbals, and horns before battles. The relentless pounding of curse, giant kettle drums, and davul, double-headed bass drums, struck terror into the hearts of enemy forces. Some European accounts describe soldiers freezing in panic before even seeing the Ottomans paralyzed by sound. Drums also enforced power off the battlefield. In royal courts across Asia, Africa, and Europe, drum ensembles announced arrivals, marked coronations, and underscored political rituals. To beat a drum was to declare, power is present. Even enslaved people in the Americas used drums as tools of resistance. On plantations, rhythmic communication kept culture alive and helped orchestrate secret rebellions. The drum, even under oppression, refused to be silenced. So whether it signaled divine right, military discipline, or raw fear, the drum has always carried a message. This is who rules. This is who marches. And this is the rhythm of power. As civilizations branched out across continents, so too did their rhythms, evolving in form, purpose, and philosophy. In the East, drums became tools of precision, spirituality, and ceremony. In the West, they leaned into military power and eventually orchestral grandeur. Two worlds, two paths, one heartbeat. In India, the drum became a sacred instrument of divine language. The tabla with its crisp tones and fluid grace was used in classical music and devotional performances. But it was more than accompaniment. It was conversation. Each stroke had a name, a meaning, a syllabic identity. Indian drumming wasn't just percussive. It was spoken poetry, trained over decades. The tabla player was not just a musician. He was a linguist of rhythm. In Japan, the Tao drum emerged as a ceremonial giant, played in Shinto rituals, theater, and war. Tao required not just technical skill, but physical discipline. The drummers moved with martial precision, their stances grounded like warriors. In festivals, the booming Tao echoed through mountain valleys, believed to drive away evil spirits and call the gods down to earth. Meanwhile, in Indonesia, the kendang drum led the hypnotic flows of gamelan orchestras, guiding dancers and musicians in sacred temple ceremonies. These rhythms were layered, interlocked, and celestial, a sonic reflection of cosmic harmony. Across the world, in Europe, drums had a different story. They were largely utilitarian during the medieval period, signaling soldiers, marking time, enforcing discipline. It wasn't until the Renaissance and Baroque eras that drums began to enter formal music. Even then, they were kept in the background, tonally thundering beneath royal fanfare or echoing in grand cathedrals. In this divergence, you see two philosophies. The East saw rhythm as art and spirit, something tied to breath, chant, and meditation. The West saw it as structure and force, a tool to rally, march, and measure. But both understood the drum's core, power. To shape time, to dictate pace, to elevate ritual, to connect humans in ways that transcend language. East or West, sacred or strategic, the drum remained central, always listening, always speaking. From mountaintop temples to jungle clearings, from desert fires to candle-lit cathedrals, drums have always had a place where the human meets the divine. Long before organized religion took root, rhythm was already a sacred language, a way to pray, to summon, to transcend. In Africa, drums were not just instruments, they were spiritual beings. In Yoruba traditions, for example, the bata drum was used to communicate with the orishas, gods, and ancestral spirits. Drummers weren't performers, they were priests. The rhythms they played were encoded prayers, inviting the gods to descend and dance among the living. Each pattern had a purpose, each beat a direction. In Hinduism, the drum appears even in the hands of gods. The deity Shiva, in his form as Nataraja, dances the cosmic dance of creation and destruction with a small hourglass-shaped drum in hand, the damaru. Its beat represents the pulse of the universe itself. From silence to sound, from void to form, the drum is a divine heartbeat. In Buddhism, the ritual frame drum is used in monastic chants and meditation ceremonies. Its slow, soft strikes guide breath and awareness, acting like a metronome for the soul. It's not loud, it's not aggressive. It simply reminds the practitioner to return again and again to the present moment. Across the Americas, indigenous tribes use drums in vision quests, sweat lodges, and healing ceremonies. The beat is constant, steady, mimicking the rhythm of the womb, helping participants enter trance states or connect with ancestral spirits. In these spaces, the drum doesn't just accompany prayer, it is the prayer. Even within Christianity, where rhythm was often subdued, the drum still found a sacred role. In gospel traditions, particularly in African American churches, drums became a means of praise and power, a heartbeat behind voices lifted in devotion, a reminder of struggle, hope, and divine rhythm in every life. No matter the faith, the ritual, or the God invoked, the drum has been there not as decoration, but as a vessel for energy, intention, and the mysteries we cannot speak. Because when words fail in worship, rhythm remains, and the divine always listens. For thousands of years, drums were solitary instruments. One body, one sound, one purpose. But in the heart of the industrial age, something revolutionary happened. In factories, streets, and music halls, percussion was reimagined, and by the early 20th century, multiple drums were no longer scattered across a stage. They were united, forming something entirely new, the drum kit. It was born out of necessity. In the late 1800s, military and theatre bands required several percussionists to play bass drum, snare, cymbals, and woodlocks, each handled by a different person. But space was tight and budgets were tighter, so drummers began to combine instruments into a single playable setup. By 1909, the first bass drum pedal was patented. A drummer could now strike a massive drum with one foot, freeing their hands to do more. The idea caught fire. Over the next few decades, drummers added hi-hats, toms, cowbells, and ride cymbals, creating a setup that could mimic an entire percussion section, all from one seat. What emerged was more than a tool. It was a drummer's throne. And then came jazz. In smoky clubs and underground dance halls of New Orleans and Chicago, the drum kit exploded into life. Jazz drummers didn't just keep time. They played the kit like a voice with syncopation, swing, and sensitivity. Legends like Gene Kruger and Buddy Rich turned the drum set into a lead instrument. Rhythm became storytelling. As jazz evolved into rock, the drum kit grew louder, heavier, more powerful. The 1960s and 70s saw kits expand with multiple toms, splash cymbals, and double bass pedals. Drummers like John Bonham, Neil Peart, and Keith Moon pushed the limits of stamina and creativity. The drummer wasn't in the background anymore. He or she was the engine. Today, the drum kit is a global staple. From gospel churches to EDM stages, from punk garages to world tours. And even as digital kits and drum machines rise, the physicality of a live drum kit, the sticks, the skins, the sweat, remains irreplaceable. It's a symbol of modern rhythm, a fusion of centuries, where tradition meets innovation, and where one drummer can speak with 10 voices at once. The world beats in thousands of dialects, and so do its drums. From continent to continent, culture to culture, the drum has taken countless forms, each carrying a distinct identity, sound, and purpose. These aren't just instruments. They're cultural signatures, crafted from local materials, shaped by local hands, and steeped in the rhythms of everyday life. In West Africa, the J remains a heartbeat of community gatherings. It speaks in sharp, slaps and deep bass tones designed for storytelling and spontaneous conversation. Next to it, the dondon provides the foundational pulse, a rhythmic anchor around which others can dance. In Africa, a drum ensemble isn't just music. It's a conversation between spirits, ancestors, and the living. In the Middle East, the darbuka, a goblet-shaped drum made from clay or metal, delivers crisp, fast-paced rhythms essential to belly dancing and classical Arabic music. Its voice is sharp and articulate, demanding precision from its player and movement from its listeners. Across the Caribbean and Latin America, drums tell a different story, one born from resilience and fusion. The conga, bongo, and timba reflect the blend of African, indigenous, and Spanish influences. In Cuba, the sacred ba drums are used in Santaya rituals, each drum speaking a divine language tied to the orishas. In Brazil, the thunder of Cerro and Cuica drive samba parades through the streets, infusing joy into protest, prayer, and carnival. In India, the Mridangam and tabla dominate South and North Indian classical music respectively. These drums are so precise, they are tuned to pitch, blurring the line between rhythm and melody. Each finger movement matters. Each stroke carries centuries of tradition. Then there's the frame drum, one of the oldest in human history, appearing in everything from Persian daf to Irish bodhran, from shamanic tools to folk ensembles. Played with fingertips, mallets, or brushes, it's proof that even simplicity can be sacred. What unites them all? Purpose. Whether guiding dance, healing, ritual, or revolution, each drum reflects the soul of its people. Their rhythms carry geography, history, and identity. The global drum family isn't just diverse, it's universal. Because no matter where you go, the earth still echoes with rhythm. As the 20th century drew to a close, the sound of drums began to change. Not in rhythm, but in texture. The physical gave way to the programmable. The sweaty palms, the wooden sticks, the calloused fingertips, all began to share space with circuits, pads, and software. The age of digital drums had arrived. It began in the 1970s with primitive drum machines, early devices like the Rhythmicon and Roland CR78 that used analog circuits to simulate basic beats. At first, they sounded robotic, even awkward, but musicians saw something else: consistency, control, and endless possibility. Then came a revolution. In 1980, Roland released the TR-808, a drum machine so iconic, its deep, booming kick and crisp snare would go on to define entire genres. Hip-hop, techno, electro, and trap were all born in part from its synthetic pulse. It was no longer about mimicking acoustic drums. It was about creating new sounds entirely. As digital audio progressed, so did the tools. Electronic drum kits, like the Roland FE drums, allowed drummers to play naturally, while triggering thousands of sampled or synthesized tones. Artists could now rehearse silently, record without microphones, and switch drum kits with the press of a button. And with computers came digital audio workstations, DAWs like Ableton, FL Studio, and Logic. Now, anyone with a laptop could build complex rhythms, layering kicks, snares, hi-hats, and sub-bass into vast sonic architectures. Finger drumming on MIDI pads became an art form of its own. Some feared this shift meant the death of traditional drumming, a replacement of human feel with cold precision. But that didn't happen. Instead, hybridity emerged. Acoustic drummers began integrating triggers and samples into their kits. Producers started layering human-played drums with machine beats. The organic and the synthetic found a groove together. Digital drums didn't erase the past, they reimagined it. And today we live in a world where a single person in a bedroom can build rhythms once requiring entire orchestras, where ancient grooves from Africa, Asia, and the Americas can be sampled, twisted, and given new life in neon-lit dance floors. The tools have changed, but the purpose remains the same: to move bodies, to shape time, to make silence speak. Across every era, every empire, and every evolution in technology, one thing has never changed. The drum remains our oldest and most enduring voice. From ancient fire circles to modern concert halls, from sacred rituals to digital dance floors, the drum has never been just about music. It's about connection to ourselves, to each other, to something bigger. It is the heartbeat we all share. Not metaphorically, literally. Because even before we're born, nestled in the womb, the first rhythm we ever hear is that of our mother's heart, steady, safe, alive. And when life begins, we chase that rhythm forever. The drum has been our companion through joy and war, through worship and protest. It has marched beside kings and risen with rebels. It has echoed through temples and subway, tunnels. It speaks in every language because it is a language, one that bypasses thought and speaks directly to the body, the bones, the blood. In moments of grief, we drum to mourn. In moments of ecstasy, we drum to celebrate. And in the quiet spaces in between, we drum to remember who we are. Today, percussion continues to evolve. You can find handpan street musicians weaving new age, rhythms on city corners, indigenous communities preserving ancient drumming traditions against all odds, stadium drummers rallying crowds in unison, children banging pots and pans with instinctual joy. Even artificial intelligence is learning rhythm. But no algorithm can replicate the human soul behind a single imperfect beat. Because rhythm is not just counted, it's felt. And maybe that's why the drum has outlived empires and trends. Because deep down, we all crave the anchor of time, the shared pulse that tells us we are here together now. No matter how advanced our instruments become or how virtual our experiences grow, there will always be something profoundly grounding about skin on skin, stick on hide, hand on wood, a beat, a breath, a beginning. The drum is not a relic of the past. It is a reminder that we were always meant to move in rhythm, to listen, to feel, to play. And as long as humanity endures, the drum will never be silent. Before Manhattan became a forest of glass and steel, it was an island of shadows, not cast by towers, but by church steeples and sloping rooftops. In the early 1800s, the skyline barely existed. The city clung to the southern tip of the island, a dense sprawl of brick towners, timber-framed shops, and dirt-packed roads. Buildings rarely climbed beyond 5 or 6 stories. Not because ambition was lacking, but because gravity had the final say. The taller the building, the more weight it carried, and with stone and brick, height came at a steep price. The walls had to be thicker at the bottom to support the upper levels, leaving less room inside and requiring enormous foundations. To build high was to build heavy, and heavy didn't make financial sense. So the city grew horizontally, spreading northward along a grid that had been planned in 1811, one of the boldest urban blueprints of its time. But underneath that grid, beneath the layers of cobblestone and soil, Manhattan held a secret weapon: bedrock, deep, dense, and unwavering. The granite spine that ran beneath the island would one day support some of the tallest structures in human history. But for now, it lay quiet, untouched, waiting. Life in early Manhattan was noisy but grounded. Commerce bustled in the harbor, ships lined the piers, and horses clattered through narrow streets. The economy grew, immigration surged, and the island swelled with energy. But still the city hugged the ground. The sky remained untouched. The only real vertical statements were churches, Trinity Church being the most prominent. Its spire, completed in 1846, rose, over 280 ft, and for a time it was the tallest structure in New York. But even that was more symbol than skyline. What no one knew then was that the skyline's future wouldn't be shaped by stone or wood, but by iron, steel, and vision. And it wouldn't be limited by the ground. It would rise far above it. Manhattan wasn't yet a city of towers, but the stage was being set. The island was ready. The dream was forming, and soon the skyline would begin to stretch. For centuries, gravity was the greatest architect in Manhattan. It kept buildings short, cities flat, and human ambition tethered to the earth. But in the mid-9th century, two breakthroughs would break the skyline wide open. One lifted people, the other lifted buildings. The first came in 1852, when an inventor named Elisha Otis unveiled his revolutionary safety elevator. In a dramatic demonstration at the New York Crystal Palace, Otis stood on a platform suspended high above a crowd. He ordered the rope to be cut. The crowd gasped, but the platform didn't fall. A hidden mechanism locked the lift in place. With that single breathtaking moment, Otis changed the rules of height. Until then, the top floors of buildings were the cheapest. No one wanted to climb stairs. But once elevators became safe and practical, those upper floors became premium space, offering light, air, and status. The vertical city suddenly made economic sense. But being able to move people upward wasn't enough. Buildings still relied on load-bearing walls, which grew thicker and more cumbersome the higher they went. That's where innovation number 2 arrived, the steel skeleton. In the 1880s and 1890s, engineers began using steel frames to support the weight of buildings, allowing exterior walls to become thin curtains rather than heavy structural anchors. This method, known as steel frame construction, gave architects a new freedom: build as high as the frame could handle. Suddenly, height was no longer a risk, it was a strategy. The technology had arrived, the materials were here, and Manhattan, with its solid bedrock and booming economy, was the perfect canvas. The island's tight geography encouraged vertical thinking, and its status as a financial capital meant that everyone, from banks to newspapers, wanted their name visible in the clouds. The elevator made the sky accessible. The steel skeleton made the sky buildable. Together, they didn't just change architecture, they redefined what a city could be. Now, the race would begin, not outward, upward. By the late 19th century, New York City was no longer content to sprawl. It wanted to soar. The ground was full, the streets were packed, and the only place left to build was up. With steel frame, construction, and the elevator now established, Manhattan became a proving ground, and the skyline a battlefield for ambition. The first shots were fired in the 1890s. In 1890, the New York World Building, home to Joseph Pulitzer's newspaper empire, rose 20 stories above Park Row. It was the tallest office building in the world. Briefly, not to be outdone, the Park Row building claimed the title next in 1899, standing at 391,000 ft. Each new tower was a declaration, not just of wealth, but of vision. To build higher was to announce, "We are the future." Soon, the skyline began to sprout with steel giants. The The Singer Building, completed in 1908, stood at 612 ft, becoming the tallest building in the world and the first structure to surpass the height of the spire of Trinity Church, which had held the record for over 50 years. But even that wouldn't last. In 1913, the Woolworth Building took the crown, designed by architect Cass Gilbert and funded in cash by retail magnate Frank W. Woolworth. It rose 792 ft over 55 stories in a soaring display of neo-Gothic beauty. Dubbed the Cathedral of Commerce, the Woolworth wasn't just tall, it was majestic, an architectural sermon about America's rise as a modern power. But this wasn't just architectural competition, it was branding warfare. Corporations and institutions vied for the tallest, most distinctive buildings, towers that would etch their names into the sky. Every new height was a headline, every silhouette, a symbol. The skyscraper became the ultimate billboard, permanent, imposing, impossible to ignore, and beneath it all, the rhythm of progress beat relentlessly. Steam shovels dug foundations into granite. Riveters hammered steel day and night. Immigrants and ironworkers balanced on beams, hundreds of feet in the air with no harnesses, only grit and resolve. The skyline was no longer theoretical. It was real, and it was rising. As the 1920s roared through Manhattan, the skyline began to dance, not just climb. This was the era of Art Deco, a time when architecture wasn't only about height but style. The Jazz Age poured elegance into steel and stone, and New York's buildings became icons of movement, light, and energy. The most dazzling of them all was the Chrysler Building. Completed in 1930, it stood 146 ft tall, briefly becoming the tallest building in the world. Commissioned by car magnate Walter Chrysler, the tower wasn't just a monument to corporate success, it was a symphony of design. Its stainless steel spire, built in secret and hoisted into place overnight, shimmered in the sun like a crown. Ornamental eagles modeled after hood ornaments jutted from the corners like guardians of the future. With its curves, chevrons, and machine-age detailing, the Chrysler Building didn't just scrape the sky, it seduced it. But the race wasn't over. Just a few blocks away, another titan was rising. The Empire State Building, completed in 1931 during the depths of the Great Depression, it soared to 1,250 ft, stealing the title from Chrysler and holding it for nearly 40 years. Built in just 410 days with thousands of workers laboring through wind, snow, and steel dust, the Empire State wasn't just a building, it was a message. New York endures. While much of the country struggled, Manhattan pushed upward, and its buildings mirrored the era's dual identity. Elegant but aggressive, optimistic yet competitive. The Art Deco style captured the contradictions of the time. Geometric but graceful, modern but steeped in myth. Towers weren't just functional, they were sculpted, glowing at night like beacons of possibility. And yet beneath all that glitter, there was purpose. These skyscrapers were built by barons and moguls who wanted more than profit. They wanted legacy, a permanent place in the skyline and in history. By the end of the 1930s, Manhattan's silhouette had taken shape. The city was no longer just a capital of finance. It was a cathedral of ambition, a skyline that didn't whisper progress, it shouted it. After World War II, Manhattan's skyline entered a new phase. One less ornamental, more corporate. The elegance of Art Deco gave way to glass, steel, and straight lines. America was now a global superpower, and New York was the front office of that empire. The skyline adapted accordingly, not with decorative spires, but with monuments of efficiency. In 1952, the United Nations headquarters rose on the East River, a bold, boxy glass tower flanked by low marble wings. It marked a shift in tone, global, diplomatic, futuristic. It wasn't just a building, it was an architectural statement about international order in the atomic age, and it set the tone for what would follow. Next came the Lever House in 1952 and the Seeger Building in 1958, both defining examples of the international style. These towers, with their curtain walls of reflective glass and steel frames, were minimalist by design, free of decoration, stripped of sentiment. They didn't look like cathedrals or castles. They looked like machines, precise, modern, and ruthlessly practical. The Serum building, designed by Ludwig van der Reyer, was especially influential. Its bronze-tinted glass, uniform grid, and open plaza introduced a new kind of urban presence, not to impress with flourishes, but to project order, discipline, and power. This was corporate architecture at its peak, cold, beautiful, and authoritative. As businesses boomed, so did the skyline. Midtown became the hub for America's major corporations, banks, media companies, law firms. These new skyscrapers didn't compete for beauty, they competed for square footage, for location, and for presence on the horizon. Gone were the soaring spires and gargoyles. In their place stood mirrored monoliths, anonymous giants that reflected not just the clouds, but the ambitions of Wall Street. And yet in their silence and simplicity, these towers spoke volumes. They told the story of a country obsessed with growth, precision, and modernity. They defined the corporate era, shaping the look and feel of cities across the globe. But even amid all this glass and steel, one thing remained true. The skyline was still a symbol. Only now it whispered power, rather than shouted beauty. By the late 1960s, New York was already a vertical masterpiece, but it still had room to dream bigger. That dream took shape at the southern tip of Manhattan, where a pair of identical towers would soon alter the skyline forever. They were bold, controversial, and unlike anything the world had ever seen. They were the twin towers of the World Trade Center. Conceived as a hub for global commerce, the World Trade Center project was overseen by the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. Architect Minoru Yamasaki designed the buildings with a radical minimalist approach. Vertical lines, aluminum cladding, no setbacks. Each tower would rise, over 160 ft, dwarfing every building before them. The ambition wasn't just architectural, it was ideological, a statement of global connectivity, a new temple for capitalism. Construction began in 1966. To make room, an entire neighborhood, Radio Row, was raised. The foundations required a revolutionary technique known as the slurry wall, allowing engineers to build deep into the soft riverbed while holding back the Hudson. It was one of the most challenging engineering feats of its time. When completed in 1973, the Twin Towers weren't universally loved. Some critics called them sterile or boxy. Others mourned the loss of the ornate towers of the past. But to many, the towers were pure presence, bold, confident, and commanding. They didn't dance with the sky like the Chrysler. They didn't taper like the Empire State. They stood firm, twin pillars of certainty and scale. More than just buildings, the World Trade Center became an international symbol of business, of unity, of American might. People came from around the world to visit the observation decks, to dine at windows on the world, or simply to stare up in awe from the plaza below. For nearly 3 decades, the Twin Towers dominated Lower Manhattan. They anchored the skyline, giving it symmetry and gravitas. And while other cities built taller structures, none carried the iconic weight of those two towers rising side by side. The skyline had changed once again. This time, not with ornament or artistry, but with monumental ambition. On the morning of September 11, 2001, the Manhattan skyline changed forever, not by cranes or construction, but by violence and smoke. In less than 2 hours, the twin towers of the World Trade Center collapsed into dust, fire, and twisted steel. Thousands of lives were lost, and the two pillars that had once defined Lower Manhattan were gone. The attack wasn't just an assault on people or buildings. It was an assault on symbols, on what those towers stood for. Commerce, modernity, freedom, ambition. For decades, the Twin Towers had defined the southern end of the island. Their clean, monolithic forms had become visual shorthand for New York itself. Now, that skyline was fractured. In the days and weeks that followed, Lower Manhattan became a wound, open, smoldering, raw. Where once there had been height and light, there was only absence, and that absence echoed. Photographs of the skyline looked hollow. The familiar silhouette was broken, and the space that had once pulsed with global energy became known as Ground Zero. For the first time in a century, Manhattan wasn't building up. It was mourning. The city grieved, but it also endured. Steelworkers, firefighters, police officers and volunteers poured into the site, not to construct, but to recover. Rubble was cleared. Lives were honored. Silence replaced the clang of iron. In a city always rushing forward, this was a forced pause, a long breath held in collective pain. But even in sorrow, New York did what it had always done. It looked up. Discussions about rebuilding were complicated, emotional, political. What should take the place of the towers? Should anything rise again? Could the skyline be restored without erasing the loss? For years, the hole in the ground remained, a reminder of what was and what was taken. It became sacred space. And yet, slowly, plans emerged. Designs were drafted. Cranes returned. Steel returned. Not to erase the tragedy, but to create something new beside it. But before anything was built, one truth stood clear. The skyline was no longer just a symbol of power or ambition. It had become a memorial, a silhouette shaped by both triumph and tragedy. And the story wasn't over. In the aftermath of devastation, a city known for speed, ambition, and movement paused. Not to surrender, but to reimagine. Rebuilding the Manhattan skyline after 9/11 wasn't just a matter of architecture. It was a matter of identity. What would rise in place of the Twin Towers? Could anything? The answers came slowly. In 2003, a design by architect Daniel Lubuskin was selected for the new World Trade Center site. It wasn't just about height. It was about healing, memory, and renewal. The plan would blend commercial space with public memorials, parks, transportation, and light. It wasn't a return to what had been. It was a statement of what could be. At the heart of it all stood a new tower, One World Trade Center, originally called the Freedom Tower. Rising from the northwest corner of Ground Zero, it would become the tallest building in the Western Hemisphere at 1,676 feet, a number chosen to echo the year of America's independence. But this wasn't just about patriotism. It was about defiance, about reaching up again despite loss. Construction began in 2006, and in 2014, One World Trade Center opened its doors. Clad in shimmering glass and standing like a crystal obelisk, it didn't try to imitate the past. It offered something new, reflection, both literal and symbolic. The building changes with the sky, glowing, darkening, disappearing, depending on the light. It is presence without arrogance. Beside it, the 9/11 Memorial opened in 2011. Two deep voids where the original towers once stood, each with a continuous waterfall and the names of the fallen etched into bronze. It's not just part of the skyline, it's part of the city's soul. The new skyline took years to take shape. Other towers rose, 3 WTC, 4 WTC, and 7 WTC. Each one sleek, modern, and purposeful. Together, they represent not just a city rebuilt, but a city transformed. New York didn't just replace what was lost. It evolved. It honored the past while building for the future. And in doing so, it reminded the world of something deeply American and deeply human. You can knock a city down, but you can't keep it from rising. Today, the Manhattan skyline is more than a collection of buildings. It is a living symbol of ambition, of resilience, of the American dream itself. No other silhouette in the world carries so much weight. It's etched into pop culture, history, and memory. You can draw it with 5 lines, and people will recognize it instantly. It tells a story of bold engineers and fearless iron workers, of architects who imagined spires that pierced clouds, and of immigrants who crossed oceans to help build them. It speaks of risk, reward, and reinvention. The constant churn of New York itself. It has never been finished, and it never will be. The skyline is alive, always changing. In recent years, it's stretched even higher, but not in Lower Manhattan, This time, the vertical race moved uptown. Along Billionaires Row, super slender residential towers like 432 Park Avenue, Central Park Tower, and 111 West 57th Street now rise like needles above Midtown. These skyscrapers are feats of engineering, pencil-thin, wind-dusted, and made for the ultra-wealthy. Critics call them sky-piercing expressions of inequality. Others see them as marvels of modern ambition. Meanwhile, in Hudson Yards, an entirely new neighborhood has appeared with gleaming glass towers, public art, and corporate headquarters, rising where rail yards once sprawled. The skyline now stretches farther west, evolving with the city's changing needs and ambitions. But even as it grows, the skyline holds its past tightly. The Empire State Building still glows at night, the Chrysler still gleams at sunrise, and One World Trade Center stands solemn and proud. The skyline remembers what came before, even as it reaches for what's next. More than any monument or statue, it is the skyline that defines New York. Not just in form, but in meaning. It is a place where humanity dared to build upward again and again through booms, busts, wars, and wounds. A city of millions reflected in steel and glass. It doesn't just mark where the city ends, it marks where dreams begin. Because in Manhattan, the sky has never been the limit. It's just the next floor. It's the next floor.